Imagine being a queen. Beautiful, powerful, loved, not just by the people of your kingdom, but by the most powerful being in the entire universe, a god. Now imagine that same god's wife finding out. And imagine that her revenge isn't aimed at him, it's aimed at you. Your children gone, one by one. Your sanity shattered, your body warped beyond recognition, your eyes no longer able to close, so you are forced to watch the horror of your own existence forever. This is the story of Lamia, and trust me, long before Medusa, long before the Minotaur, long before any monster you've heard of, this was the creature that made Greek mothers pull their children close and whisper into the night, "Be good, or she will come." To understand what Lamia became, you first have to understand what she was. The ancient Greeks placed her origins in Libya, a vast and mysterious land to the west of Egypt, full of desert winds and forgotten kingdoms. Her parentage, like so many figures in Greek myth, gets a little complicated depending on which ancient writer you ask. Some say she was the daughter of Belus, one of the legendary kings of Egypt, making her royalty through and through. Others, including the archaic lyric poet Stesichorus, writing as far back as the 6th century BCE, say her father was none other than god of the sea himself. Either way, the one thing every ancient source agrees on: Lamia was breathtaking. She wasn't just attractive in a nice, everyday sort of way. She had the kind of beauty that stops time, the kind that makes gods look twice. And that, right there, was the beginning of all her trouble. Now, you have to remember something about Greek mythology. It isn't just stories. It's a window into how the ancient Greeks understood the world. Fate, power, jealousy, and the cruelty that can hide inside even divine relationships. And if there's one recurring theme in these myths, it's this: being too beautiful, too close to a god, or too favored by the wrong deity was never a gift. It was a curse waiting to reveal itself. For Lamia, that curse had a name, and that name was Zeus. Zeus, king of the gods, lord of thunder, master of Olympus, had a well-documented problem with fidelity. His list of mortal lovers reads like an ancient directory: Io, Europa, Semele, Alcmene. The list goes on and on. Lamia was added to that list. The exact nature of their relationship, depending on which version you read, ranges from a mutual love affair to the all-too-common Greek myth trope of a god who simply decided a mortal was his. But what happened next is something every source agrees upon. Zeus and Lamia had children together. Children who would mean everything to her. And now, enter Hera, Zeus's wife, queen of Olympus, goddess of marriage, and, as the ancient myths never stop reminding us, a woman with exceptional patience for her husband's betrayals, but absolutely zero patience for the women he betrayed her with. Hera had a long history of punishing the wrong person. She turned Io into a cow. She drove Hercules to madness. She made the life of nearly every mortal woman Zeus ever touched an absolute nightmare. But what she did to Lamia, that was something else entirely. Hera came for the children. The details shift depending on the source. Diodorus Siculus in the 1st century BCE, later scholiasts commenting on Aristophanes and other ancient writers all tell slightly different versions of the same horror story. In some accounts, Hera killed Lamia's children outright. In others, she kidnapped them, hiding them away where Lamia could never find them. And in the most devastating version of all, Hera drove Lamia into such a state of madness that Lamia herself destroyed her own children, her grief twisted into something incomprehensible by the goddess's curse. And then, as if that wasn't enough, Hera delivered a final vicious blow. She took away Lamia's ability to sleep, to close her eyes, to escape, even for a moment, into the mercy of unconsciousness. Lamia would be awake, always, with no rest from what she had witnessed. What happens to a person when grief has absolutely nowhere to go? When there's no sleep to escape into, no warmth left in the world, no children to hold, no God coming to save you, and the same images play behind your eyes on an endless, torturous loop. They break, and something else crawls out of the wreckage. That is what happened to Lamia, the queen of Libya, the woman who had once sat on a gilded throne with power and beauty and love, was gone. What remained crept into a cave and began to hunt. She stole children, not as a monster simply acting on instinct, but as a broken woman inflicting on others the specific wound that had been carved into her. Mothers who still had their babies, that was who she targeted. She would take those children in the dark of night and she would devour them. And with every act of horrific violence, her body reflected what her soul had already become. Ancient writers describe the transformation in stages. The beauty faded first, then her face distorted, pulled and reshaped into something wrong, something that belonged to the dark rather than the light. Later traditions added a physical element, the lower half of her body becoming serpentine, writhing and scaled, while her upper body retained the ghost of the woman she had been. Half human, half monster, caught between two worlds, belonging to neither. This is when Lamia stopped being a person and became a force.
Now here is where the myth gets genuinely strange, and honestly, a little insulting. Zeus, the god whose love affair had triggered this entire catastrophe, apparently looked down on Lamia's suffering and decided to help. Sort of. He gave her two things. The first was the gift of prophecy, the ability to see the future, which, according to some interpretations, came bundled together with the second gift, which was this: the power to remove her own eyes and reinsert them at will. Let that sink in for a second. Your children are gone. You haven't slept in what feels like eternity. You've been turned into something monstrous, and the all-powerful God responsible for setting all of this in motion gives you detachable eyes. The idea behind it, according to ancient commentators, was that Lamia could take out her eyes and put them aside when she needed rest, so that even without sleep, she could have some small reprieve from the constant waking vision of her grief. It was, in the most bizarre sense, a mercy. A strange, inadequate, almost absurd mercy from a god who had offered her everything and then inadvertently cost her what mattered most. Some scholars have also interpreted this gift as connected to prophecy, the eyes that could see things ordinary humans couldn't, that could peer beyond the veil of the present into things not yet formed. Which, in a dark sort of way, tracks. The woman who had already seen the worst thing imaginable, what was left to frighten her? But here's the thing about Lamia's story that most people never hear. This is only the beginning. Because over the centuries, through ancient Greek poetry, Roman literature, Byzantine chronicles, and the philosophy halls of antiquity, Lamia evolved. She stopped being just a child-eating monster haunting the dark. She became something far more complex, far more seductive, and far more dangerous. She became the prototype for something that would terrify the Western imagination for the next 2,000 years. Here's the thing about ancient myths. They don't stay still. They breathe, they shift, they adapt to every era that inherits them. And Lamia is one of the most fascinating examples of this, because the monster who crawled out of that Libyan cave, grief-hollowed and child-hungry, did not stay that way forever. Over the centuries, as Greek culture evolved and writers from different eras picked up her story, Lamia transformed again. By the classical period, around the 1st century CE, a new version of Lamia began to surface in the literature, and this version was, if anything, even more terrifying than the last, because this Lamia didn't look like a monster at all. She looked beautiful. Ancient writers began describing a class of creatures called the Lamiae, plural, who were essentially a category of supernatural beings linked to Lamia's legacy. These weren't just child-eaters anymore. They were shapeshifters, phantoms that could wear the face of a gorgeous woman, move through human society completely undetected, and lure young men into their arms, and then drain them. Blood, flesh, vitality, the Lamiae took it all. Ancient writers, including the philosopher Philostratus, explicitly connected them to the Impusai, demonic beings associated with the goddess Hecate, who were said to haunt crossroads and feast on the living. Philostratus himself described them as beings who were devoted to physical desire and the pleasures of Aphrodite, but who ultimately used that desire as a trap, fatting up their victims on affection before consuming them whole. This, right here, is one of the oldest templates for the vampire myth in Western history. Centuries before Dracula, centuries before Nosferatu, ancient Greece had already imagined a creature that wore beauty like a costume, seduced the unsuspecting, and drank them dry. And the most famous story of someone confronting one of these creatures, that story has a philosopher as its hero. The story comes from Philostratus, a Greek writer of the early 3rd CE, in his novelistic account called The Life of Apollonius of Tyana. Apollonius was a real historical figure, a wandering philosopher, mystic, and alleged miracle worker who lived in the 1st century CE. He was the kind of man ancient writers loved to mythologize. And one of the most dramatic scenes in his biography involves a young student of his named Menippus of Lycia. Menippus, a handsome and intelligent young man, had fallen completely, hopelessly in love with a woman he met near Corinth. She was stunning. She was wealthy, or so it seemed. She had a magnificent house, refined tastes, attentive servants, and a devotion to Menippus that felt almost too perfect. Apollonius saw through it immediately. He warned Menippus, "You are warming a snake against your chest. You are being hunted." But Menippus, as young men in love can to do, didn't listen. He went ahead and planned a wedding, inviting everyone, in fact, except the one person the mysterious woman had specifically asked not to be included, Apollonius of Tyana, who showed up anyway. At the banquet, Apollonius sat in silence and simply stared at the bride, calmly, unflinchingly. The guests grew uneasy. Menippus, humiliated, demanded Apollonius stop, and Apollonius looked at the young man and said, with the patience of someone watching a fire spread towards someone who refuses to move, "You are about to be devoured." He turned to the room and declared the woman to be one of the Empusai, a Lamia, a creature in the habit, he said flatly, of targeting young men in the bloom of health, specifically because their blood was fresh and pure. And then something extraordinary happened. The entire banquet dissolved, the sumptuous food gone, the magnificent furniture vanished, the servants never there. The house itself was revealed to be an illusion built entirely from the creature's will. And the woman, the beautiful bride, screamed and disappeared completely. Menippus was left with nothing but empty arms and the terrible understanding of how close he had come. This story is so gripping that it traveled through time all the way to 1819, when the English Romantic poet John Keats reworked it into his famous narrative poem, Lamia, where the student Lysias plays Menippus, and the ending is, if anything, even more tragic. In Keats's version, when the philosopher exposes Lamia at the wedding, she doesn't just vanish, she dies. And Lysias, unable to survive the loss, dies too. Heartbreak and horror tangled together into something almost beautiful. What makes Lamia even more haunting is that she didn't exist in isolation. Go east into the ancient Near East and you find Lamashtu, a Mesopotamian demoness who preyed on pregnant women and newborns, crept into homes at night, and drank blood from men. The name alone, Lamashtu, Lamia, carries the same ancient tremor. Many scholars believe they share a common origin, possibly stretching back to some older, pre-Greek fear of a devouring, night-haunting feminine force. Go into the Hebrew tradition and you find Lilith, Adam's first wife in some readings, a woman who refused to submit, who was cast out, and who became a night demon that stole and killed newborns. The Vulgate Bible, the Latin translation used throughout medieval Europe, actually used the word Lamia to translate Lilith in the book of Isaiah. They were considered the same category of nightmare. The Greeks themselves noticed echoes between Lamia and Medusa, both tied to Libya, both punished beyond reason for circumstances they didn't choose, both transformed into something terrifying, and both somehow retaining a feminine form even in monstrosity. These weren't coincidences. These were the same ancient human fear wearing different cultural masks. The fear of the night, the fear of the mother who has lost her child and cannot be reasoned with, the fear of beauty that conceals destruction. Every culture on earth has a version of Lamia. The Greeks just gave her one of the most fully realized stories. For centuries in ancient Greece, Lamia's name served a very practical purpose. Mothers and nursemaids would invoke her the moment a child pushed back against bedtime, refused their supper, or wandered where they shouldn't. Eat your food or the Lamia will come. Go to sleep or the Lamia will find you in the dark. The 1st century historian Diodorus Siculus specifically documented this practice. Philosopher Strabo mentioned it. The Byzantine lexicon of the 10th century still had a full entry for her. She was, in every meaningful sense, the bogeyman of an entire civilization, the Greek equivalent of what the Coco is in Spain and Latin America, what Baba Yaga is in Russia. The creature parents invented and then couldn't uninvent because it turned out children are afraid of exactly the right things. And then something interesting happened. The ancient world fell. The Roman Empire rose and crumbled. Christianity spread across Europe, and yet Lamia survived every single transition. Medieval Christian writers picked her up and ran with her. Pope Gregory I wrote about the Lamia as a symbol of heresy. The Archbishop of Reims listed Lamia among the supernatural threats to Christian marriages. By the Renaissance, she had become synonymous with witches and was being cited in theological debates about the nature of evil. Then, the Romantics found her, and she became something stranger and more beautiful than ever. Keats's Lamia of 1819 doesn't frame her as a monster at all, really. She's a tragic figure, trapped, longing for humanity, punished for wanting what she can't have. Painter John William Waterhouse captured this same ambiguity in 2 extraordinary canvases. A woman sitting by a pool, staring at her own reflection, a snakeskin draped around her waist as the only hint of what she truly is. Beautiful, melancholy, dangerous. All 3 at once. today, you'll find her in horror films, fantasy novels, anime, television. In Rick Riordan's Demigod Diaries, she appears as a villain with serpentine eyes. In the BBC series Merlin, she's a creature who drains men through a kiss. In the 2024 British series Domino Day, the lead character slowly discovers she is a Lamia, feeding on the energy of her dating app encounters. 3,000 years, and the story still has something to say. Before we close, I want to take a moment to sit with the story. Because underneath all the mythology, the vampirism, the serpentine horror, and the philosophical debates, there is something genuinely human at the heart of Lamia's myth. She was a woman who lost her children. That's it. That is where this entire story begins. Not with evil, not with a choice she made, not with a character flaw or a moral failing. A woman lost her children. And the world had no container for her grief, so they turned her grief into a monster. Think about what it says about the society that created this story. That when they tried to explain a woman's uncontrollable, boundless, unassuageable sorrow, the explanation they reached for was, she must be devouring babies in the dark. The pain was too big. The anger was too raw, so they gave it scales and fangs and made it something you could point to and fear, rather than something you'd have to look at directly and feel. Lamia is what happens when a culture doesn't know what to do with a grieving woman. She's also, in a darker reading, exactly what happens to women in Greek mythology who get too close to divine power without divine protection. Zeus loved her, but his love offered her nothing when Hera arrived. There was no defense, no recourse, no justice, only transformation. In the ancient world, the lesson was supposed to be, don't attract the attention of gods. But reading it now, millennia later, the lesson feels different. It feels more like a record, an inadvertent one, of what the powerful do to the vulnerable, and then what stories get told afterward to explain it away. Lamia was a queen, then a lover, then a mother, then a monster, then a vampire, then a bogeyman, then a poem, then a painting, then a lesson in philosophy, in theology, in psychology, and in what it means to be human in a world that doesn't always treat humans kindly. What she never was, in any version of the story, was simple. And maybe that's why 3,000 years after the ancient Greeks first whispered her name to their children in the dark, we're still here talking about her. If you want to go deeper into the creatures and myths that shaped Western civilization from the ground up, hit subscribe and come back. There's so much more darkness left to explore. Thanks for watching.